Hey folks, today I'm going to take you through what the disallow directive in your robots.txt file is for, and how to go about formatting and implementing it. Now I also cover the different uses for disallow, nofollow, and noindex in another video, so feel free to check those out for a more thorough explanation of the differences between all three. But briefly, here's the comparison in a nutshell. With the nofollow meta tag applied to specific links in a page's HTML code, you're telling the search engines not to follow those links and therefore not to assign any page rank to them, presumably because they might reflect on your page negatively. This can apply to comments sections or paid content that might contain spammy links or negative outbound links that you can't control. With the noindex meta tag applied in the head section of a page's HTML, here you're telling the search engines not to index or crawl that particular page and to have it not show up in search results. Now there are quite a few uses for this, but often enough this is applied to a thank you page or similar pages that aren't contributing positively to your overall SEO efforts, or to pages that you don't want users accidentally stumbling across when searching for something. I'll come back to this a bit more because in some cases you'll want to use this method instead of the disallow directive. Like generally speaking, you can think of it kind of like this. The disallow directive is a great method to improve SEO and make sure search engines are spending their precious time indexing pages that are positive in terms of page rank and content, and to ignore pages that aren't. And this can be done page by page or at the folder level or by keywords and file types. But for sensitive information or for pages that you really don't want to show up in search results by accident, then applying the noindex meta tag page by page is your solution. Just note that with both of these tags, noindex and nofollow, neither will apply if you've used the disallow directive in your robots.txt file, and that's what we'll cover here today. The robots.txt file, it lives in the root directory of your site, and it's the first thing search engine spiders will check when crawling your site. Whatever you tell them they're allowed to do or not allowed to do when it comes to crawling your website, they'll always respond to this command first. Now typically a robots.txt file starts with the line user agent wildcard. This is a general command telling all search engines to listen up and take note of whatever directives follow within that robots file. But if you want to, you can also get very specific here, and you can tailor all your directives for specific web crawlers. For instance, I can give Googlebot very specific rules, I can give Bing's bot very specific rules, or both, or as many specific bots as I like. Now in theory, and it's a great question that people often ask, you can target certain rules for bad bots, for lack of a better word. These can be malicious bots designed to crawl around looking for security vulnerabilities in your site, or just plain annoying ones that are part of some service out there in the internet wasteland that are of no use to you, and that can end up burdening your server with excessive traffic loads, or bots running around trying to harvest email addresses. Thing is though, in reality, these bad bots can often be designed to flat out ignore your robots.txt file anyway. So in my opinion, it's not really worth it to try and create rules for them. If copies of a bad bot are using multiple IP addresses, it's also pretty hard to pin them down and block their connections. But on the other hand, if you find that maybe there's one particular bad bot that's operating from a single IP address, then you can configure your server or network firewall to block access. But for now, let's just set that aside and just focus on the legitimate search engine bots, and why you'd use the disallow directive. With the disallow directive, you're telling them not to bother crawling that page, or pages, or that file, or folders of files, and having them show up in search results. This is a very critical issue in SEO, and it shouldn't be dismissed. You'd be surprised at how many times someone either makes the mistake of blocking search engines from their entire site by accident, or what's much more common, is not using this directive at all, which results in search engines wasting their precious crawl time indexing pages that aren't contributing positively to your SEO, like purely functional files or private content. It's very important that search engines crawl your site as efficiently as possible, and the disallow directive in your robots.txt file is your number one friend in that effort. All that said, just be aware that even with the disallow directive, it is possible in theory that search engines can still find and index that URL if it's linked to from other parts of your website or from other outside sources. In essence, while the robots.txt file is kind of like a stop sign coming off the highway to your house, search engines can still end up coming to your house by way of side streets. Your robots file isn't intended to remove URLs from the index. It's only to prevent search engines from crawling certain pages or folders directly. Now I'll show you how to tackle that issue specifically at the end of the video. But for now, let's get to it. The syntax is simple. Just disallow, space, then the page, the file, or the folder that you don't want them to look at. Now in this case, with nothing after the disallow, there's no target to disallow, so the search engines will ignore this. But with a /, you're actually preventing your entire server and all of its contents from being indexed. Now that's probably not what you're going for if you're trying to get the most out of your SEO efforts. More common uses of the disallow directive are with the CSS, your JavaScript files, maybe a private folder that you have, or a backup folder, a CGI bin that contains functionality for your website but no SEO-related content, a temp folder, a junk folder, maybe the location of your admin panel and all its related content. These are all pretty common to disallow. You can also make use of keywords, the wildcard and the $sign in your disallow parameters. These can be quite powerful features to leverage, but let's go over exactly how to use them. First, let's start with how to use keywords. If you specify a folder name, / and use a keyword, let's say that we don't want indexed any URLs that contain the word test, then that disallow only applies to all URLs that contain test within that specific folder. If you want to apply it site-wide, then you'll want to start with your root directory. Now in this case, search engines will ignore any folder named test, or that starts with test, like my folder test subject I have in my directory. It will also ignore any HTML or PHP files named test. However, so you know, unfortunately it doesn't apply to anything named test with a capital T. This is case sensitive, so if we also have pages like that we don't want indexed, we'd have to make another disallow directive. And also, neither of these apply to URLs that have test as a parameter. You can also disallow certain file types. For instance, using the wildcard and the PHP file extension, the search engines will ignore all PHP files. Just note that again, this is case sensitive, so if you have any uppercase PHP file extensions, you'll also need to reflect that in the disallow directive. And with the $sign, you're telling the disallow directive to only apply to URLs that end with the PHP extension. So this would not apply to PHP files that end with a parameter, with a / or PHP5 files, for instance. And by the way, it should also be noted that the allow directive, at this moment in time, is only supported by Google and Bing crawlers. But you can disallow an entire folder, for instance, then use the allow directive to let them crawl for a specific file or files within that folder and to ignore all the rest. If for some reason you want to create this rule for all search engines out there, then the only solution is a bit on the awkward side. In that case, the only thing you can really do is to have all the content that you want disallowed under the umbrella of one folder, then store those files you do want crawled in the folder one level up. Now, I'm not exactly sure why someone would want to do this. It's quite rare, but just in case that's useful to you, there you go. That would be the way to go about it. Otherwise, if the Google and Bing bots are good enough for you, then you can go ahead and use the allow command. Just be careful not to have conflicting commands. Like, let's say that within this folder I have a sample HTML file here. If I allow this entire sample folder, but I disallow all HTML files within it, then in this case the search engines won't know what to do. A rare example, but something to be aware of nonetheless. Anyway, what's far more common is to disallow specific folders in their entirety, or to disallow specific pages. Of course, if that page is in a subfolder, then the location should reflect that. In this case, buried in one of my folders, in another subfolder, are a few files I have for split testing that I don't want crawled since they contain duplicate content. So I'll just add those here. Now, quite a few webmasters use canonical URLs or meta-robot tags to avoid being penalized for duplicate content. But that's not going to mean that search engines won't still crawl that content and allow it to show up in search results. With the disallow directive, you don't have that worry. And also on a general note, the robots.txt file always has to be named exactly that, all lowercase. And while we're at it, you'll also want to be sure to include your sitemap in the robots.txt file. Again, these disallow directives are an incredibly useful tool to direct your crawl budget to your best and brightest SEO content. To prevent search engines from indexing unhelpful content is a great way to make sure that they are crawling and indexing the right content to skyrocket your SEO efforts. But always be careful, because using error-ridden or improper uses of disallow can damage your SEO. So be sure to implement it wisely. And then when all is said and done and you've created your robots.txt file, named it as such, and have it saved into your root directory, it's definitely worth taking one last moment to test it. Just Google Robot Test, and you'll find their testing tool designed precisely for this purpose. Just open the tester, select your website, and test. And then take care of any formatting errors in the event that there are any, hopefully not. And finally, one last word on the issue of indexing still taking place even with the disallow directive. This can happen in cases where the page has already been indexed. Now, this shouldn't be an issue if the website is brand new. This typically occurs in cases where the page has already been indexed, or if another website out there in the landscape links to it, or if you have other links on your site that point back to that page that you don't want indexed. In those cases, the search engines will heed that first directive, let's say not to follow our Contact Us page, but as they're crawling our home page, for instance, if they come across a link to our contact page from there, they might very well head over and end up crawling it and indexing that URL. Now, I wouldn't panic about this and scrap all the disallow directives in your robots.txt file just because of this. Just be aware of the possibility and keep it in mind, particularly if you have a web page with sensitive information that you don't want indexed or have people accidentally stumble across in search results. In those cases, you'll want to remove the disallow directive from robots.txt and add this noindex meta tag to the head section of that particular page. Then search engines may come to that page through a link thinking, okay, this might be of interest, then see that meta tag and realize that it's not to be indexed at all. And lastly, you can also add a noindex directive in your robots.txt file to pages or to folders or use wildcards, all the same as we just discussed. No need to overkill here really, but this might be useful as a second level of security for pages with sensitive information, or that you really don't want people stumbling across in search engines. This is best applied, however, when your website is new and it hasn't been indexed at all yet. Feel free to check out our other videos so you can keep fine-tuning and getting the most out of your SEO. And click subscribe to stay updated with new tips and tricks to get you to the top of the search engine results pages.